Okay. And so welcome everyone. This is it's great to see all the people here. We're gonna be starting our webinar in just a second. And just to FYI, so actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's introduce ourselves since we got a lot of new people here, which is great. And I'll just go ahead and start out since I'm talking. I'm Joe Glines, and I'm not a programmer, and nor do I pretend to be one. I love automating things and saving time. And so I found AutoHotkey, I don't know, I can't remember how long ago now, but it's been quite a while. In the last like 4 years, I've been actually doing a lot more with objects and feeling to where I almost have a clue what I'm doing, but I have a real passion for automating. And so a couple years ago, I started talking to Jackie on the AutoHotkey forum, and he had helped me so much with a lot of things, and we just started talking. And so I'm in Dallas, and he's over in Denmark, which I learned was a country, not a city, being the Americans that we are. Anyway, and so he had helped me a lot with, especially with the webs. Well, I guess it was web scraping. Now I think about it, it was a lot of stuff with COM and IE, and so we started talking, and then we finally decided to start doing these webinars. And so, Jackie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, much like Joe, I'm not really a programmer. I found AutoHotkey almost 5 years ago now, and I had a small task that I needed to do, and I needed to actually swap the information from one web page to another, and looking for something that was able to hold more than one value in the clipboard at a time. And AutoHotkey was one of the first things that popped up. So I've been using it ever since for more and more involved things. And I'm totally happy, and it's actually helped change my career path. And now I'm using it almost every day. So I'm quite happy with actually doing this. And have loved actually learning to know Joe here and doing these webinars. It's great to both use it in your everyday and being able to share it with other people that have a passion for it as well.
Yeah, and your comment earlier about having multiple things you wanted to have on the clipboard, it's one of the things I love about AutoHotkey is there's just so many different things that you can do. Right, it's a Swiss Army knife of programming to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit more, what would you call it, accessible perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned that people who actually started using AutoHotkey before picking a career and maybe becoming more involved with coding and stuff like that might still have it in their arsenal, although they have learned quite some languages that people would feel were more advanced or even more, what would you call it, recognized as actually being programmed.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because I'm not a programmer, but when I was working at the large company, I interacted with a lot of programmers, and a lot of them would say, "Oh, I've used AutoHotkey in the past, but they stopped doing it." And yet, one of the things for me, the simple hot strings that I use, saying daily is ridiculous because I use them hourly. I mean, I use them all the time to help me write my code, right? And I'm like, and yet I watch them type the same things over and over and over, or go find the snippet somewhere, and I'm like, you understand that's easy to do with AutoHotkey, and yet they don't do it.
And yet they don't do it.
That's the thing. So let's get going in here. So. Currently, we had 76 registrants, which is awesome. This is. We actually held off on doing web scraping webinar because we knew it was one of the largest appeals and has the most versatility, and it just, in today's world with more and more stuff going into the cloud and a browser being the programming tool that you interact with, whatever tool you're using, it's just it's unlimited, the usefulness of it. Having said that, that's why right now and I think we were alluding to this earlier, we're not trying to make money, right? Jackie and I both love doing this. We do it because we want to help other people, and also I do it because I learn from people. I've learned a lot from having these webinars, and other people chime in and help solve things for us and bring up ideas that we didn't know about or whatever, and it's just great. The thing is, like it looks like I don't have the count in front of me. We have 25 participants right now, right, on the webinar. Imagine if everyone tried to talk at the same time, right? So this first hour typically, or however long we go for the first part, we have everybody muted just because it would be mayhem if everyone was talking and we talked over each other. After that first bit, we'll unmute. What we'll do is we'll make it where you can unmute yourself. And then if you have questions, it's much easier to verbally ask a question. Try not to I don't remember that. What I was going to say though was if your question is long right now, as we go through, we want to hear questions too. It's not that we don't want input and questions, but use the chat, right? If you use the chat, Jackie or I are usually monitoring it, and we'll watch it. And if it's a simple question, we'll address it. And if it's not a simple question, just say I have a question, and we'll manually go unmute you, and then you can ask your question. Just sometimes I hate typing out a bunch of stuff when it's just easier to explain something and have a quick dialogue back and forth.
For sure. Yeah.
All right. So before we jump into web scraping, what we typically do on our webinars is we highlight some script, some code. And in this case, I use this one. I use it pretty regularly, and I use it so regularly I forgot I even had it. And what it does, it's not really the code itself that's the great script. But what it is it's a good demonstration of, like, I'm sure everyone here has probably used a hotkey at one point or another, right? Well, what this code does, let me start up something that I don't care about and bring it over. So it is running right now because it's in my main script. If I hold down the escape key while whatever active program's on, it will close whatever is active, right? So it looks at the active, it gets the active program, the active window, and sends this post message. And I linked to, this is a webinar we discussed what post messages are and the concepts, but it sends that. And if you hold down escape for over half a second, if it's not held for over half a second, it just sends the escape key like it normally would. And so it's basically a way for you to, if you're like me and have so many hotkeys that you started running out of using modifier combinations, you can actually repurpose a hotkey by having it held for a certain amount of time, right? Yeah. Which is, so I have my escape key set up to where any program I'm in, if I hold down escape, it'll try to kill it. And also I should have said, we'll put these resources online and then email links to them as well as recordings of the video of the webinar after it. All right. Yeah. Bear with me 1 second here. For some reason, I lost my chat window. And
there isn't much going on at the chat at the moment. So.
Well, I just want to make sure I don't miss it. And Zoom is an amazing tool. At the same time, it has so many different windows that it's confusing.
Someone is actually asking here, what is the ideal editor to use when typing out code? And just to quickly address that, because that's a topic where people have a lot of opinions. Some use Notepad++, like you have already said you did, and there is some code highlighting and stuff that you can actually implement into Notepad++. A lot of people use SATA for AutoHotkey, like Joe and myself most of the time. And we have also featured AutoHotkey Studio, which is made entirely in AutoHotkey and actually works, if not as well as SATA for AutoHotkey, but at least that well, if not more tailored to AutoHotkey in almost any way, I think. So you can pick whichever one actually suits you the best, and some feel that the ones that they're used to is the best one to use, and others, like myself, had nothing. I started with the normal Notepad and thought, hey, it's going good, until I actually saw that you could get the code colored, and you could also get stuff like examples of what parameters are needed, like the one that you're seeing here on the screen, stuff like that. And as soon as I saw that, and I saw that in ZA for AutoHotkey first, I've used that ever since. So
the only thing I would add on to that is, which, yeah, and I love Site. I've done a lot. I have a lot of videos on how to customize it. It's one of the things I like about it. But also, I cannot in any way argue why Site is any better than Notepad++, right? To me, those are, whatever you're used to using, use it. The difference between both of those and AutoHotkey Studio would be AutoHotkey Studio is built only for AutoHotkey. And with Site, because I play around with HTML and XML and SPSS and SQL and Python and you name it, a lot of other stuff, I can have the property files, and I have over 80 of them, and I can have all the code. Right now I have the main ones. Let's see down here. These are the different extensions. I have it automatically do the color coding for me, which is really nice. I even have it where for Python, I can run code from within here, and it will interact the same way that it does with AutoHotkey, which I find really helpful.
Yeah, and I know that at least Notepad++ has these same kind of modules that you can put into it. So yeah, some of them truly do have some ups.
All right, so on to web scraping. And of course, the first thing I'm going to tackle is not web scraping. I wanted to take a step back, and because I didn't know where people are going to start from, right? And let's first talk about what an API is. I mean, API is such a buzzword these days, right? And what is an API? Well, an API is it's a programming interface. And what is an API call? It's basically any type, when you have a device, right, and that device makes a call to a server, right? That's an API call, and that server, generally speaking, of course, you send something there because you want something back, right? And it's going to do a return to you. And if you're using a tablet versus a laptop or a Lego computer, right, or a phone or another server, right? Those are all just making connections between the different computers in an intelligent way, right? They're asking a certain question, they get a certain answer. That's an API call. Examples of them, which we just discussed, right? But they're, web browsers are API calls. And it's one of the things that at work I would always get people say, hey Joe, we're trying to do this, with the GUI web browser, but we can't do it. Can you use the API? And I'm like, well, actually the web browser is an API call, right? It's just, typically an API call, I'm using syntax to do something, not a web browser with a bunch of extra stuff. But all of these are examples of our daily stuff we do, right? They're all API calls. And then what I did want to do was offer this up as a preview, because today's webinar is on web browsing, right? We'll be doing web scraping with web browsers. But I wanted to also, later on, because they're so valuable, I wanted to touch upon here and explain kind of the differences between an API call with a web service versus a browser web call. So a browser, of course, there's a GUI interface, right? You're looking at it and clicking on stuff. In an API call, there's no built-in GUI interface, right? You might create one in order to help streamline your API calls, but it doesn't have one generally built in for it. It's not for people to point and click.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah. As you said yourself, the web browser only gets the information via let's call it an API call. And when it gets the information, the browser just knows how to render HTML and CSS and stuff like that. So the web browser is, as you said yourself, a GUI interface for all of the requests that actually go back and forth.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And to touch on what you just brought up, so a web browser, like when you load a page now, and it's pretty crazy when you use the like the built-in tools to look at the network traffic, it is literally dozens or hundreds of API calls that when you load that page, it's sending a bunch of, not just one, go give me this page, right? It sends a lot of different requests to a server, and it's interactively, pulling these things back in there and loading it, versus with a web service API call, it's typically like you send one request there and you get one request back, and that's your call, right?
Yeah.
And then Jackie also mentioned here, so this is displaying a bunch of different types of data, right? It could be HTML or XML, and you name it. There's so many different things, which can be the case in web services, but nowadays it's more and more. JSON is really the dominant one out there. In XML, it's lost out a bit, I think, to JSON, but not. It's still, you see it a lot, right? It's one of those two is typically what you get a response from.
Yeah, people use it for different things, but yeah, sure.
And here's the big one, right? This is when you say, like, when I go to do load a web page, on average, a web page is, let's say it's around a meg, right? Versus an API call, because you're not bringing back all that HTML and all the other junk associated to it to display it properly and all the stuff. You said, I just want this one little sliver bit, right? It's tiny. It's super tiny in comparison. And that's why when there is a web service that you can use, also because, which is what we're going to cover in web browser stuff and web scraping, web pages change, right, in their structure and everything. And that's when, man, if an API, if a web service is available and you can use it, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, one of the difference would be is in browsers, of course, the browser, you first log into the tool, and then, like, let's say you go to LinkedIn, right? Well, I've logged into LinkedIn through the GUI interface, and I'm doing stuff. In a API call, typically you'll do like the OAuth 1 or 2 and have a handshake, in which, when you're not used to it, it's confusing at first, especially the second level to set up. It's a bit of back and forth. And then there are billions. I looked it up. I'm like, I mean, how many web pages are there, right? There are billions, of course, that you can access. And basically, if you can access it, you can grab what you want from it, right? Some are easier than others. But the number of web services out there are growing greatly, but I'd still say it's probably like maybe even like 1,000 to 1 ratio for web pages compared to API services. Right, there's not nearly as many services out there, but the big ones, like, let's say Facebook or LinkedIn or Google or whatever, Google has a bunch that I use. The big ones will have them, which is great. It's not the itsy bitsy ones.
Yeah, and it's worth knowing that APIs, the application programmable interfaces, can also be in your client-side applications. So something that you have installed, or what we are actually using on Windows. All of these del calls that we're doing is the same as an API call.
That's right. Yeah, you'll probably heard the term. It's the Windows API, right? And you're interacting with Windows, and it's the same process. Just it's not an external server. Generally, you're talking to Windows. And then browsers are, the HTML, the structure of a web page is very standardized. Web services, when they first started coming out, they were pretty crazy, right? Very different, not structured. Especially who is it? I think it was Amazon. Google is great of having like one structure across all of their different stuff. They're very consistent. Yet the big ones I've used, each one I go to use is very different, and the support for it also is not. It's not easy to find. It's not correct. It's not updated. So they have some way to go there, but it is getting better.
Yeah, it was the same as the internet in general, where people might be doing it in HTML, which, as Captain Odin said, could be defined as a subset of XML, but still people are at least writing it in mostly the same format, so the browsers can comply in the same way. They have not always done that. They're getting better at it, and that's only because a lot of people are actually working on making the browsers and the standard of how you do web programming in general is to kind of make everybody move in the same direction, like when IBM and Macintosh and all of those were fighting back in the day. And now most of us just see the web pages as similar or maybe even identical. And yet some of the browsers are still doing things differently, but now the programmers or the people behind the scenes actually take care to make sure that they support most of the big browsers. But you still see here and there, and you could actually see it on the AutoHotkey forums. Some of the people that are using, let's say, I can't remember all of the names, but there's a Pearl Moon or something, a browser like that people are using, which is giving them a bit of headaches sometimes because the way that the AutoHotkey forum is set up and the servers behind the scenes and stuff like that ain't actually providing compatibility for that browser. But yeah.
And then the last two here, which is really going to lead us into web scraping, the on the right, the HTML DOM or document object model is a map of the structure of a web page, and it's critical. I mean, you can do web scraping and not understand it, but I'll tell you, and I'm going to repeat this 80 times in this webinar, the more you learn about the DOM, the better your life will be when you try to do web scraping. When I first started doing stuff, I didn't take time to learn the structure of it, and the more I would slowly learn it, it really helped me grasp how I can do things better, much easier. Yeah. And then here, there are a lot of different structures for web service APIs. These are by far the most. REST, it used to be SOAP, and then now REST I think is the most common. And then this one I see a lot on the WordPress API you can use to access WordPress stuff. But these are some of the different ways that you might go about using a web service. So let's go into our next page. Now we mentioned the HTML DOM, right? The document object model, and basically this
Joe, when I see this on screen, I'm not seeing everything. I don't know if it's my setup or if it's probably mine. It seems like it's mine. Yeah.
Does that help? Is that too small?
Yeah, it's probably too small. It was me. I had the window not full screen, and that actually made it not resize the image.
Oh, gotcha.
You, but chop it instead. So yeah.
No worries. And Ben sees everything, including dead people. But I guess that maybe he's not old enough to remember that
everything.
movie.
That's good.
So when you're connecting to a web page, right? There's the current window. This is the DOM structure, right? And what I tried to do is to highlight things that typically you'll be using a lot, right? So everything from the current window starts, and this is a structure. It's hierarchical, and so to access the current window, you'll go through the document and forms and then different elements. And this is where by far the majority of the things that you'll be doing, they're through this structure, right? And we'll explain more of this with some code later. These other ones, you can get, there's all the links on a page on that document. There's all the images on that document. Both of those would be arrays. Anything in the brackets here are arrays. Sometimes you might actually want to go forward or go back a page if you're using a browser, and that's in there. Or if you're connecting to a page that has frames, and that page is actually from a different website, you'd have to go up. If you were connected here, you'd have to go up a level and then over to frames, and then basically come back down through that document. For this intro webinar, we're not going to cover any of those things because they get pretty complicated, right? But I did want to highlight that, like, this structure here for the current window, this is where you're going through, and it'll make a lot more sense when we start dealing with some code.
Sure.
All right. Now, of course, the first thing I'm going to do, instead of actually doing web scraping, is I'm going to bring in an example that, to me, I think might help explain what we're trying to do, and it'll make it a lot easier if you've never done web scraping. I think this can really help you adapt it later. So bear with me for a couple minutes here. Think about the web page as a family tree. Right, and so for now, I'm going to say, hey, here's the parent node. Each of these are nodes, right, in a family, in a tree. In the parent node is Larry. Larry has an ID. This we could say is his. We think of it maybe as like it's a unique ID, right? It's his social security number or phone number, right? It's one number that identifies Larry, right? And we have that number. He might be taking a certain class, and in this case, he's taking karate, and he might have a nickname or like a tag that we'd say, right? And he's Bossy, right? From that, he has children, right? And that's what these other nodes are. This here, here, here. I mean, they're all children to some degree, just some are direct. And in it, each one of them might have those fields populated, right? They're all going to have the hierarchy. So these are all either a daughter, son, daughter, right? They're children. They may not have a name. Like here, apparently Susan forgot to name her daughter, right? And not only did she forget to name her, but she didn't give her a social security number, so she's an illegal alien and she's in trouble. But we don't know. We do know she has a kiddo tag that Larry apparently is lazy, and we'll just call them Kiddo 1, Kiddo 2, Kiddo 3, Kiddo 4, Kiddo 5. It's just easier for him, right? Yeah. So they're nicknames. And over here, there's a step-grandchild from under here that with no name, also no ID. So basically, there are different ways that Larry, if he was trying to reliably talk to a specific node, right, a specific person, he would use one of these elements on these in the different nodes to try to reach them, right? And when you have the ID, because I think I said earlier, the ID is unique, right? Well, hey, if the ID is there, I can always just use the ID. And if I want to talk to Johnny, right, I would say I'm going to use this ID and I'm going to connect directly to Johnny, right? I don't have to worry about it being somewhere else because the IDs are unique. If we wanted to talk to, let's say, Susan, right, and there are no other Susans, right? Usually names are unique also. And so if the name is present, then you can use the name. And so we could directly connect with Susan or Fred or Johnny by using, the name as the reference point to how you would connect to that person. Sometimes those may not be present. And so you basically, what you do is you use what you can. And so that's what we're gonna shift into here in a minute. But what I want to show is in this example where the kiddos, right? This is kiddo 1, kiddo 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, what happens when they inject another kid, right? And where does that kid show up? So in this next slide here, suddenly we have a kiddo over here, right? And now, because the order of how they flow, this becomes kiddo. This is kiddo 1 still, and we injected a node here, and so now kiddo 2 comes up here, right? This was kiddo 2. Now kiddo 2 becomes kiddo 3. Kiddo 3 becomes kiddo 4. Kiddo 4 becomes kiddo 5, and so on, right? And this is where what I'm trying to emphasize is if we used IDs and everyone had an ID, you wouldn't have to worry about this, right? When you use something like a tag or a tag name, which is what we'll get to in a second, it's much more likely to have other things injected in there and cause you problems in the long run.
Yeah, pages today are simply so dynamic that the programmers or whoever made it, they will often use this dynamically created elements. So you will see that when you have arrays like the kiddo array here, and you actually have more elements coming in that might also be of the kiddo type, then you can't use that reference anymore. So yeah, it's a good way of emphasizing that.
And so what you can do also, though, is you don't have to just use one way, right? What you can do, let's say we knew we wanted to talk to someone over here, we could first say, hey, I know Susan has this unique identifier. I'm gonna go basically through Susan and then get the kiddos under her. And so you're limited to just these two, right? If we were using the tag name. It wouldn't include these because see the hierarchy here? We jump down to here and then we say we go beneath Susan and only talk to the things below Susan, and then if we use a tag name, it would only be this one and this one. It wouldn't include these. Now, all of this is going to make a lot more sense in a few minutes. I just think if you've never seen or heard any of this stuff, it's really confusing at first. So we're going to first quickly talk here about the different methods that you'll use in web scraping. Right, and so remember, you know what, let me go back here. Let me grab one of these. So here I had role and name, and I had ID and class and tag, right? I put those in there specifically because in web scraping, you have different methods you can call. You can get things by an ID. You can get elements by name. You can get elements by class name, by tag name, and then this other query selector. I didn't actually include it in here, but it's the same overall type thing.
Yeah, the query selector is actually a legacy, you might call it, a way of doing stuff that's not that much used anymore, but it's still in there, and you still have access to it, and it allows for a little bit more, what would you say, wildcard searches?
It has a lot of different. I think of it as like XPath in the sense of for web scraping.
Yeah.
If you've ever used stuff in XPath, you can put in really complicated and crazy structures very, very easily and get a lot of different ways to do stuff. It's the Swiss Army knife of the ways to connect to things. At the same time, because of that, it's much more complicated and hard to remember exactly the code for it.
Yeah.
But what I also wanted to point out here, which is what we talked about on the other side, right? See how there's get element by ID? There's no S in that one, right? But there's S's in these. This is, it's a best practice to have it as unique, right? So if there is an ID on the page, it should be unique. You shouldn't have to worry that there's more than one of it. If you're using either name or class name or tag name, they may or may not be unique, right? There'll be an array, possibly an array with having multiple items, and so you just have to investigate and see, which one it is.
Yeah, but one of the things is that the S will always return an array, regardless of if there's only one. It will still return it as an array object. So you would still need to actually say, I want the first element from the object, even though there is only one element. So yeah.
And I'm hesitating because I had something else I was going to chime in there and I lost it. Sorry. The other thing I should say was it's I'd say 40% of the time an element. Yeah, maybe it's less than that, but they'll have an ID, right? This is just talking on average of all the stuff I've ever done. Maybe it's like 35% of the time it'll have an ID. Names are also probably around the same rate of being out there, and they typically, it's very rare that you have a duplicate of a name. You're using the same name. If there is a duplicate, it's actually directing you to the same spot anyway, so it's probably okay. Tag names, there is a lot of them typically, right? And then when we say tag names, it'll be like the bold tag or span or head or 8 million different types of tags, and that's where what I try to do is to go to one up above it and then navigate down. Go to something unique above it and then navigate down. But the other one I put in here, class name, it has become in the last, I'd say, year and a half. It's my go-to because it is more often than not it is present. In your web page, it has that element, and it's unique. It more often than not it is. It doesn't have to be. Remember, it's an S here, but boy, typically it is, and so it's very convenient. So we highly recommend. Hey, if ID is there, use the ID. If it's not there, look for one of these two. If neither of those are there, you might even go up a level. We'll demonstrate this in a minute, but go up a level and then go down where you can. So let's do a quick look also at the when we talk about what you're going to do, in web scraping, you typically are going to click an item on a page, or this fire event helps you click items on some things. You can focus your cursor somewhere. You can select an index, a drop-down box. You can check it or uncheck it, or a radio box, in both of those. And then for all those things, generally you're either going to try to set the value or get the value, right? Or you might want to get what text is on the page. And sometimes the inner text, sometimes it's inner text, and sometimes it's value. And Jackie, I'm going to save it for when we're doing it, but I'm curious if you have an understanding of why they use one over the other, because it sometimes throws me if like.
I don't have the exact, what would you call it, documented reason for it, but let's say you have an input element where you can actually input a value yourself, then that would be in the value of the element. But if you have, let's say, a span or something where it can only be text, the user can't actually interact with it, then it would be inner text.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now, thank you all for your patience. Hopefully, some of that was helpful. But now we're going to actually jump into doing some coding. So let me get back over here. I'll create a new file. Now I'm also going to demonstrate, and I'll have a link to it later. I'm going to launch. This is just a script launcher here. I'm going to launch this web scraping writer script I have, and what it does is I've built in, now when I hit the button here, I have menus that allow me to automatically do what I'm trying to do. It'll inject web scraping code. So first, let me get my script started here. So this is just what I typically put in. This include here just has like single instance force and a couple other parameters. It's nothing important. And these are hotkeys that'll run what's below it. This one reloads it. This one will run what's below it. And let me save this as. All right. So now we're there. I guess the other thing to mention is with AutoHotkey, when you're using COM, you're limited to Internet Explorer, right? You can use Selenium, and that opens up the door to programmatically doing stuff with like Chrome and Firefox, and almost any browser you want, right? And but as much as I don't like IE, it's so easy to write the code and to do, because typically I'm not actually using it to browse, right? I'm automating my stuff. I'll use it. So now
and the methods and stuff like that are well documented by Microsoft, whereas the Selenium
fair enough
stuff can be hard to actually figure out.
So I'm going to launch. This is a tool that's on the forum. I made some tweaks to it and stuff, but it's still basically the overall same tool. And now here, let's say we wanted to click this button using its, and this is a web page, by the way. This I'll put, it's actually in our resources, but it's built specifically for people to test their web scraping scripts. So they have a lot of different things on the page. Like here, there's this button, you'll use the ID, this one uses the class, and this one uses the name, right? Which is the things we just talked about. Now with this tool, I can grab it here, and as you see the stuff highlighting, here is the outer HTML for that button, right? Here's the value that's in there. But also you'll notice, remember this is the click this button using ID, right? See up here, see where it says ID example? ID example is the name, and sorry for using name, but of that ID, right? And we can also, this is one of those things, I don't know when I finally realized it, but it's stupid. But it see down here where it says ID equals ID example in the outer HTML. So this tool, all it's doing, is helping you spot that. I don't have to look in here for it. It's dumping it up in here for me. And if down in here, if this had a name, we would see it up in here, right? If it said name equals Joe, then Joe would be up here.
Yeah.
So we're gonna let's get this value right here, right? So we now know this ID example. So I'm going to come back over here, and now, so first I need to, I'm going to connect to that version of IE. So I'm going to say get pointer to IE window. This first little bit here, this is a function call, and this is the function, right? We don't need to get into what that function's doing. Like the code-wise, all you have to know is that it is going to return a pointer to that page, to the active IE window, and it's going to hold it in this variable here, PWB. And one of the things, actually, before I even get going too much, I like to do is say, I'm going to throw up a message box of this will show me. Let me save this and run it. Now when I hit the button, oops,
it's behind, yeah.
Yeah. So that is the URL of this page, right? So it's one thing that I will often do when I first start grabbing a page, just to make sure like it's actually working correctly, got the right page. Yeah, it's what I want. Okay. So now I'm going to say I want to get we're going to use the ID, right? Yeah. So we're going to get from page, and we're going to get the ID. And now what we'll just do is we're going to take this ID example, And let's put a message box in front of that. So click this button using ID. See how that value matches up, and I have value here, right? So it just went and got what was on that page. Hopefully that made sense. If we wanted to instead get the outer HTML, right, what I would do is I'm going to change, actually, you know what, let's do this. I'm going to duplicate that line. And now we'll have the first one being the value, and the second one is the outer HTML.
Yeah.
Right,
can I just address that here?
Sure.
In these line that you are showing, you go through the web browser window object, the parent object, the PWB.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then you go through the document, and then you, for some reason, use the all property here, where you haven't actually talked to that one before. You've talked to all of the others, but not to the all.
I'm trying to remember. Isn't that just the that's all the elements on the page? Is that right?
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, but you can't actually structure the stuff between this when you use the dot syntax like you're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get the same.
Like that? Are you saying?
No, that won't work. That won't work. The all is doing as you said it would, but you can only use it for ID and for name.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Let's switch over. Since you brought up name, let's go back to our web page. Let's hit OK there. Go back to our web page, and now actually I'll show you here. So here there is no name, right? So we can't access that by using name as a reference, right? That has to do with what I was mentioning here, right? See how there's no name and no ID? This is what I was trying to convey over here, was that, some elements on a page don't have certain things defined. And this one doesn't have name, it has ID. But this one over here, I know because it's in the thing here, right? It tells you, hey, it has a name, and the name is name example, right? So I'm going to come back here. We'll get rid of both of those. And I'm going to use my little tool here and get from page and get name. And here's the array, right? And I'm going to put in name example. And here's a really, and when I say critical, I'm like, I can't beat this, say it enough of like, elements on a web page are zero based, right? Repeat after me about 1,000 times, because it gets very confusing. Like, you'll have error, you're like trying to loop over something and you're having errors, or you're not getting the thing, and it's like the very first thing when you want to get the first item in an array, put in 0. If we wanted the second one, we'd put in 1, right? It's one of the joys of programming is the people who years ago, I think that was mainly done for memory space, right? Not to lose the amount of memory there. But anyway, so we're gonna show. Here is the value, right? We just got the value. Click this button using name property, right? And that's what is here. Hopefully this is making sense. And so this is what you do by name. And now let's see. So let's take this as an example here. I'm going to copy that, get rid of all this, and say, so what this is going to do is show me the length of how, it's going to give me the count, basically, of how many names there are with this one name. And there is just one, right?
Yeah. There is one, and it's placed at 0.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
However, let's move on to the next one, because this will be a good example here. So let's go back to this, and let's use tags. So see the input? This is where we can see it's the input tag. And so I'm going to come back and get rid of, sorry, here we go. Okay. So let me get rid of that and that. And now I'm going to pull up this, get from page, get using tag name. And we know the tag name is input. And actually, let's start off with the length. and throw a message box in front of this. So there are 15 input tags on that page. And that's why you realize, like, tags, there are just a lot more of them, which when you're doing web scraping, you're trying to grab a very specific spot, right? It's tags, sometimes you have to use them, but you typically, it's a fallback, right? Or you try to grab something up above it. Oh, and let me also show you, let's say we're doing this here. We can say show parent structure in this tool, and it'll show you the hierarchy, and here, even as you click, it'll show you where you are and what you're grabbing. And so let's say I was trying to grab this input by the tag name, and there was no ID and no name, and this actually has a class, which we haven't demonstrated yet. But I could do is jump down to this first, and then grab the input under it. And if there were a lot of inputs under these other ones, it would help us not have this issue of when things get inserted before it, right? Because it doesn't interrupt that structure. So that's why typically, if you can, you go up a level and get something that's more reliable, like the name or ID or class name, and then use that. So let's go ahead and finish here. Let's say. Oops, I forgot. Yeah. Yep, I forgot. It's an array, and we'll see what the first input tag was, which is nothing, of course. And in this, so there's So the first one with the value is that click this button ID using ID. And actually, I gotta think that if we did the next one, which is the third input, is the class, right? So they're just in a row. Yeah. We could loop over these, and so here, let's say. Now, because in AutoHotkey, if it's just 2 lines, you don't have to put brackets and closes. It's just going to loop over these things. What was there 15? Is that what it said?
Yeah, it said 15. Yeah.
So it's going to.
Right now, it will just show the same one.
Oh, because I'm an idiot. Yeah. Thank you. And remember this here, a index -1. A index is the iteration of that loop, but we're going to subtract because loops start at 1, you need to subtract 1 from it, so this will be a 0 the first time through.
Yeah.
And that first one was blank, but then there's the second, the third, the fourth, and the name, and then anyway, on and on. That's funny. I love Slendy WebDriver. Yeah. So that's how we're iterating over the different items there. Let's go ahead. Let's say, you know what? Let's finish up, and we'll just have a quick example on using class name, just because it is. I mean, it's very similar, right? But let's say here's the class. In here, in this example, here class is this. So I'm going to copy that. Come back over here. Put in the class there. We'll assume it's the very first one. Throw up a message box. That var equals is just if I was trying to store that into a variable. So here we have that. Click the button using class, right? And actually, let's do exactly what that says. It's a good segue. We're going to change, instead of demonstrating what's there or getting it, we're going to click it. So remember, back here, we talked about the different types of things that you'll do. Let's go back over to here now. So we were getting the value, right? And I don't think I showed intertext. I should have showed outer HTML. We can do that next. You know what? Let's do that.
But still, some of what you also did was also shown in the learner tool. So yeah,
so here's the outer HTML. All we're doing is swapping out these different endings to make it do different things on that location, right, of that object. So I'm going to put back in now, instead of getting the outer HTML, I'm going to click it. And you know what? We don't want a message box, because showing a message box when you click it makes no sense, right?
would it be a good idea to actually have a hotkey for actually clicking it so we could view it while you clicked it?
Well, I have one.
Okay.
Because
you have one at the top
right.
there. Yeah.
That's why I always have that. Yeah. So now when I hit my hotkey, it clicked the button, right? And it even tells you button success. I'm gonna go back a page. Of course, you couldn't see that, right? But I didn't magically hit the button that you couldn't see. I had just changed that to click. Now, on some pages, this will work just fine. Jackie and I chatted about it. I think on average, I'd say about 50-60% of the time, this works like you hope. Sometimes it doesn't, and if it doesn't, you would throw in this .fire event on click after it. So I would just add that in here. In the two of these, like this, I'd say that gets it up now to where it's like 85% of the time, maybe a little higher. We'll click the button that you want. Some pages, they're getting much trickier on how they do their web pages, and you have to go actually create the event and then trigger it, and that's beyond the scope of this webinar. But try this first. If it doesn't work, add this in after it, and the odds are pretty good that it will work.
Yeah, I'd say that the click is the go-to one, and if that doesn't work, most of the time you actually need to debug something else before actually changing to, let's say, fire window or something like that.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's probably because you're the wrong place in the array or something like that.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? Yeah.
Yeah.
So another one, and to Jackie's point there, like back to this loop, what is a nice thing to do is to say, so I'm going to append that data. And actually, let's also give ourselves a little cheat sheet here. So that was a little hot string I have for throwing it all into a GUI so I can look at it. What this is going to do, this period equals tells it to basically keep concatenating as it loops over onto this variable. And I added the index here, and I didn't make it 0 because we want to start at 1 for our visual purposes, even though when we're iterating over it, we'll know it's actually 0, right? But for us, we're going to start at 1. Put a tab in between. And now when I save and run this and launch it, we very quickly got, here are the different, what we're using, the input tags, and the inner text, or the values, sorry, of what they were. And back to Jackie's point, often you think you know exactly where you are, but man, I mean, you can waste hours when you suddenly realize that like you weren't on the right button that you thought you were, right? Or this is a great little quick way to make sure that you're actually accessing the right thing that you thought you were. The other one, and this is what I mentioned earlier, and Jackie gave his input on, is see how this says value right here and not inner text? Let me see if I can find a different one on this page. Oh, see how that is? It just changed to inner text, and that means that here it's back to value and then inner text. So see how that's changing on this tool? That's another one where you need to make sure you put the right thing here. So if I had put inner text, it would come up blank, right? It wouldn't have captured anything because on that it's value. And that's the only thing I'd say is like I've sometimes wasted some time where I thought my whole issue was some other thing entirely, and it was just I didn't realize that it was a value and not inner text. So typically what I do is I start off, because the outer HTML stays consistent, right? I start off with just getting the outer HTML, even though it's not pretty to look at. But that way I navigate to the right thing. And when I finally know exactly the thing I'm trying to access, that's when I'll go ahead and say, okay, now let me actually get the specific content that I want.
Yeah, I addressing something in the chat, Joe, and
Okay.
that's a few questions that we've gotten. And the actual difference between click and fire event on click, I couldn't tell you exactly what the difference is. I have an idea that fire event might actually bubble the event up more than the click does. And that's probably why it works a little better at times, because on the surface, it should be doing the same thing. If you read the documentation, it sounds as if it's doing the same thing. So if you use click, that should be the same as fire went on click. But if you have, or the programmer has actually programmed in different types of event listeners into the page, then that's why some of them might work and some of them may not. And the on-click firing of the event, and fire event is something that's, I can't say that it's dispatched, but it's not used as often anymore. You wouldn't see it that often. And that's because they've begun using other methods of actually listening for click events. And that's probably because it's either unreliable or because they want to make it more difficult to automate. I can't say. Right. But for some reason, it has become
more prevalent.
Yeah, a little harder to actually manage what to do on which page.
Yeah. I don't know if you got a chance to look at that course I had with the JavaScript events. It's a lynda.com course that I worked through, and I think they actually discussed what you're mentioning there, and I know they talked about the bubble up versus the other the kind of going down in the different things you would use. Anyway, it was really complicated. It's a great course. I think it's in my resources here, but it's very specific. It's very minute and I think too in depth for like this intro webinar. It's definitely like a level 2 or 3 as far as I'm concerned. But the thing is, it does come up where the typical things, if you just say click or event click or fire event and whatnot, don't always work, but more often than not, they do. It's just, and there are a couple other ways you can try to work around it as well.
Often when it doesn't work, it's because the designer of the web page has used some other way of making a button than an actual input element, or he hasn't used the what would you call the native way of using a button. Would be by having the button know where to go when it was clicked, or to submit a form as an example, so the server would know, hey, this button was actually clicked and I now need to do this. If the programmer has had some elaborate idea of how to actually do his things, like he wants you to click something that's not a button, but he still wants it to act like a button, he might have written a lot of code, or someone else at an earlier stage has done that. And that's why you sometimes see this simple click won't work. That's one of the reasons, at least.
So that's all. Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, so I've mentioned, I think, a couple times on different webinars, but I learned all my object orientation stuff in using AutoHotkey beyond hot strings and hotkeys. I learned from reading the AutoHotkey forum, and I have links to like Jethro's post and Micker's. They're both great of like intro to learning stuff. But I learned dot notation stuff first on Webscraping, and later started using it for like Excel and Outlook and Office, different things. And web pages, what I realized later was like, oh, I so wish I had learned Excel first, right? Because Excel structure doesn't really change, right? It's you access the same, tab the same way and the same name structure, the same ranges, and it doesn't change. Web pages, hundreds of thousands or millions of people design different web pages differently, and there's so many different things they can do, and it's a spaghetti mess, right? Of like, it's gotten incredibly better, as we mentioned earlier, but there are so many different ways you can do stuff with web pages that it's it can be, when you're first learning it, it can be tough.
Yeah.
So I wanted to work through our next example here. I'm going to comment out the rest of the stuff first. So, and if you remember back over here, I see there's a couple questions in the chat. I'll get over there if Jackie, you want to read them and figure out an answer. But I'm going to finish up on what I was talking to here. On this slide, I mentioned here's the current window document, and then see how links are off of document. They're not under forms and elements. That's why in here, when we're getting the links on a page, right, I'm going for, this is my connection to that document, well, to the pointer to that IE window, and I'm going to go navigate down to the document, and then I'm going to get the links. And first I'm going to say is, you know what, let's say, I'm going to say links.length. And this is going to show me there are 63 links on that page, right? And then we're going to do just like what we did before. We'll say, first we'll just throw a message box up in here and say links dot, oops. So now this is going to loop over those links, right? And so we're getting the URL, the href for them. But let's say, let's you know what I should have had in here was the number. So now we know which one we're on, right? It's easier to see that. And then let's throw in another thing here. Let's do a tab, and then say I'm lazy, so I'm going to come back here and borrow this. And let's get the what is it? Is it inner text?
Inner text, yeah. Or
and
inner
now
HTML or whatever.
Yeah.
Depending on what you need.
So that is showing us the text that's displayed for those URLs, if there is text there. Right? And of course, we could just store all that into our message and concatenate it. And now, oh, I don't want that one undone. I want, there we go. That's right, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, unfortunately, there's some, I think, looks like there's line breaks, and so I'd have to clean up that inner text, right, and remove the line breaks to display that properly. And that was why when I first brought this up, I wanted to walk through to show you it's really this simple. It's really that simple to get all the links on the page and throw them in there. However, in this example, in my tool here, and that is the wrong one. Get all links on page. That's why it looks much more complicated, but when I run it now, it has cleaned it up, right? Because I found that very annoying where, you know, the text would break. And so here's a quick, easy way that I can have all the text on the page. So here's the number, here's the inner text, here's the outer HTML, and it looks like the outer HTML. So that's why I don't have the href, is just because I can see it in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, did you look at what someone had checked?
Yeah, I saw, let's say, Captain Odin's, the last one here, where he says sometimes the identifiers are generated when you load the page. And we kind of talked about that earlier with the dynamics of a page or the dynamics of IDs. And yeah, Google is one of those that is actually quite rigorous with generating stuff when the page is loaded. And
go ahead.
Yeah, and I'd say that if you can't find any kind of consistent, let's say, either structure to it, or one of the things that is either the class, the name, the ID, one of these identifiers, normally, I'd say most of the time, one of them is unique. or is part of a unique array at least?
Well, it's consistent, I think is what you're saying, right? It's unique. But so what I've done is, because that's what I thought you were going to say, and maybe I'm wrong on what we're trying to convey, but I have found where when I do have pages that are they look like they're constantly changing, right? And I can't reliably get something. What I realized was like, hey, the name changes or the ID changes, but like often the class name actually still stays the same, right? It's still consistent and it's unique, or it's reversed, right? The class name, let's say it's changing, but the ID is always there and it's unique. It's, if you look around, and that's what I thought Jackie was going to say, was one of them actually does stay the same, or that's when you study that parent structure, right? There's something actually right above it that is unique, and you can start there and then use tag name and count and figure out, like, it's always the fourth element under that thing.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. That, yeah, if you can't find anything that is consistent, as you said yourself, then most likely, and you can't be sure of that, but most likely the structure of it will be consistent. So if none of the IDs or classes or names or anything is the same, it is most likely often, let's say, the fourth input field. And there's no other input fields generated before it or input above it or anything like that, then you could pretty reliably manage to actually find it by using the tag.
Hey,
Other than that, yeah.
No, sorry. I was going to say what I was going to do was, because we're a little bit over an hour, I was going to stop the recording so we can break it up naturally. And then we'll restart the recording, and I have to unmute everybody for a second and then go back and set it where you can unmute yourself. So just bear with me here for a second. So first, let me stop recording.